Listen closely. This isn't bitterness speaking. This is clarity. This is the voice that finally woke up after being overlooked for too long. Don't give them another chance. Not because you despise them, not because you're furious, but because they knew exactly what they were doing when they hurt you, and they did it anyway. Some people don't hurt you by accident. They study you, they notice your vulnerabilities, they listen when you share your fears, your wounds, your past, your hopes. And they don't listen to protect you. They listen to gain leverage. They smile while collecting the ammunition they'll use against you. They hug you while calculating exactly how much harm they can inflict and still keep you close. And when the moment comes, when they feel secure enough, when they believe you're too loyal, too forgiving, too attached to walk away, that's when they strike. Calm, calculated, precise. And the cruelest part is afterward, they act as if it was an accident. They choose words carefully. They look you in the eye. They apologize just enough to keep the door ajar, not because they've changed, but because they don't want to lose influence over you. Your forgiveness comforts them. It gives them permission to repeat the behavior again and again. Understand this. A person who deliberately hurts you, watches you cry, watches you fracture, and then comes back seeking another chance, is not confused. They are not unaware. They are not learning. They are testing how much disrespect you'll endure while still labeling it love, loyalty, friendship, or family. Each time you allow them another opportunity, you teach a lesson, not the one you think you're teaching. You're not teaching them about compassion or forgiveness. You're showing them that your boundaries are negotiable, that your pain has no real consequences, that your heart can survive another betrayal, and they will believe you right up until the moment they strike again. There is a deep kind of pain that comes only from being harmed by someone who fully understood better. This isn't the pain of a misunderstanding. This isn't miscommunication. This is the pain of realization. The moment you understand they observed your loyalty and exploited it, your patience and mistook it for weakness, your kindness and treated it as a vulnerability, you are awake. And that doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. It makes you someone who believes in people. Someone who gives second chances because you understand the power of redemption. But there's a line between grace and self-betrayal. Once someone crosses that line intentionally, repeatedly, they are not deserving of another chance. They have already made their choice. Some wounds don't require closure, they require distance. You replay the good moments, the laughter, the promises, the memories. You remind yourself they aren't a bad person. But being not bad doesn't erase the damage they inflicted. Intent does not cancel impact. Love does not excuse cruelty. History does not justify repeated harm. Watch patterns, not apologies. Anyone can say sorry when they fear losing access to you. Anyone can shed tears when consequences arrive. Anyone can promise change when they feel you withdrawing. But genuine change appears before the damage. True remorse shows up without a threat of abandonment. Real love doesn't need you to keep proving your worth through surviving pain. Some people only value you while you remain available to them. The moment you stand firm, the moment you stop tolerating disrespect, the moment you stop excusing their behavior, they call you cold, selfish, changed. No, you didn't change. You woke up. Waking up is uncomfortable. It hurts to acknowledge that someone you trusted deliberately chose to harm you. It hurts to realize the bond meant more to you than to them. It hurts to understand the version of them you loved may have only existed in your hope. Here's the truth most avoid. Some people hurt you because they gain from it. They benefit from your forgiveness, your silence, your willingness to stay when you should leave. Your pain keeps them powerful. Your patience keeps them in control. And the moment you refuse another chance, that's when power shifts. You don't need revenge, explanations, or justification. The most potent response is withdrawal, calm, silent, final, not as punishment, but as protection. Every time you let them back in, you reopen a wound they never intended to mend. You give them another opportunity to remind you of how little they respected your boundaries the first time. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start doubting yourself, questioning intuition, normalizing pain, shrinking. You were not made to shrink. You were made to rise with dignity, to walk away with your head held high, to choose peace over chaos, self-respect over comfort, truth over convenience. You were built to recognize that love should not feel like survival, loyalty should not cost sanity, forgiveness should not demand self-destruction. The strongest people aren't the ones giving endless chances. They are the ones who know when to stop, who understand when empathy turns into self-harm, hope into denial. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you care enough to protect yourself from someone defining your worth through their actions. Yes, it will be quiet after you leave. Too quiet. You'll miss them. You'll doubt your choice. You'll remember their voice, their smile, the version of them you wanted to exist. That's normal. That's grief. You're not grieving them. You're grieving the future you imagined with someone who could not honor it. Loneliness passes. Self-betrayal lingers. There is a future version of you watching this moment closely. A version stronger, calmer, more grounded, more at peace. That version is pleading with you not to return, not to reopen a chapter written in pain, to choose growth over familiarity. Once someone shows they can intentionally hurt you, believing them is wisdom, not pessimism. Wisdom often looks like silence. It sometimes feels like distance. Sometimes it's walking away without closure, without answers, without apologies. That carries meaning, and it always feels like self-respect. Self-respect will take you further than love without boundaries ever could. When ready, consider this. You do not go back to the fire that already burned you, hoping it will be gentle this time. You don't put your hand on the stove expecting it to have learned a lesson. Pain is not a misunderstanding when it repeats. Pain is a message, and the message they already sent was clear. You just didn't want to accept it because acceptance meant letting go. They knew your heart. They knew your limits. They knew how far you would go to preserve the connection. And instead of honoring that, they tested it, pushed it, crossed lines, then stepped back to see if you would remain, then crossed again. That wasn't confusion. That was calculated confidence in your forgiveness. People like that don't change because of love. They change only when access is gone. And even then, many don't truly change. They just search for someone else to tolerate what you refuse to endure. You dwell on how good it felt in the beginning, their attentiveness, the sense of safety they created. But intensity at the start doesn't define character. Consistency does. Anyone can shine when they want something. True character reveals itself in discomfort, when respect is needed, when accountability matters, and that's where they failed. Stop romanticizing the version of them that existed only when it suited them. You are not heartless for walking away. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. You are not weak for feeling the ache of separation. Strength does not mean absence of pain. It means refusing to make hurt a permanent home. When someone hurts you intentionally, they accepted the risk of losing you. They just never anticipated you leaving. They assumed you'd explain yourself, bend, remain loyal to someone who wasn't loyal to you. That's why when you finally stand firm, they act surprised. That's why apologies get louder, promises bigger, affection stronger, not due to change, but because control is slipping. Don't fall for urgency. Real change is quiet, steady, and does not demand immediate forgiveness. You don't owe access to someone just because they are familiar. Familiarity is not safety. History is not proof of love. Only actions reveal true intent. Some people love only the version of you that accepts less than you deserve. Forgiveness does not require reconnection. You can forgive within your heart and still keep them far from your life. Forgiveness releases poison. Access protects your future. Healing doesn't come from reopening wounds. It comes from allowing scar tissue to form, learning from it, and moving forward. Every time you consider giving them another chance, ask yourself, what am I teaching myself by returning? Am I showing that my boundaries matter, or that they can be ignored as long as an apology sounds convincing? Self-love is quiet. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg for understanding. Self-love simply removes itself from situations that no longer honor it. Choosing that path changes everything. Your nervous system calms, your mind clears, anxiety fades. You stop waking up with dread. And the liberation that follows is unmatched, because once you step away, you realize strength isn't in enduring repeated harm. It's in knowing your worth, guarding your peace, and refusing to return to the fire that already scarred you. You stop waiting for the next disappointment. You stop bracing for impact. Peace slowly replaces chaos. And peace feels strange at first when you've been living in emotional survival mode for so long. That's when doubt creeps in. That's when you miss the intensity. That's when emotional turbulence gets mistaken for passion. But calm is not boredom. Calm is safety. Calm is what love should feel like when it's real. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Some people enter your life not to stay, but to teach you the cost of ignoring your intuition, to show you how resilient you are, to teach you that walking away is sometimes the bravest form of self-respect. And the lesson doesn't repeat once it's learned. If you go back, you're not starting over, you're continuing a pattern that already revealed exactly where it leads. Deep down, you know it. That tight feeling in your chest when you think of them, that's not love pulling you back. That's your intuition warning you. Trust it this time. Every time you ignore it, you abandon yourself a little more. Every time you honor it, you reclaim a piece of your power. Power isn't control over others. Power is control over your choices, over who gets access to your energy, over what you tolerate, over when you walk away. And once you accept that they hurt you intentionally, not by accident, not by ignorance, not by misunderstanding, you stop negotiating with reality. You stop hoping for a version of them that doesn't exist. You stop waiting for closure that will never come. You close the door yourself, quietly, firmly, without drama. On the other side of that door is a version of you that doesn't beg for respect, doesn't explain their worth, doesn't remain where they are repeatedly wounded. A version that finally understands love without respect is not love at all. There is a quiet moment, almost invisible, when you realize you've been trading your dignity for the comfort of not being alone. That moment doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes with exhaustion, with heaviness in your chest. When you ask yourself why you're still explaining your pain to someone who caused it, why you're still hoping empathy will blossom where it has never existed, it hits you. You didn't imagine the disrespect. You didn't exaggerate the hurt. You didn't misunderstand it. Your body felt it before your mind could rationalize it. That tightening in your stomach, that drop in your energy, the sleepless nights, that was your spirit rejecting what your heart was trying to tolerate. People who hurt you on purpose don't lose sleep over it. They rationalize, they minimize, they blame your reaction instead of owning their actions. When you start believing their version of events over your own experience, the damage goes deeper than the original wound. That's why returning is dangerous, not because they might hurt you again, but because you risk hurting yourself trying to make it work. You start shrinking your needs, softening your boundaries, silencing your instincts, convincing yourself you're being patient, mature, understanding. But what you're really doing is training yourself to accept less than you deserve. And the longer you remain, the harder it becomes to recognize your own worth. Some people don't want partnership. They want permission. Permission to treat you poorly and still be loved. Permission to disrespect you and still be chosen. Permission to avoid accountability while benefiting from your loyalty. When you finally stop granting that permission, they call it abandonment. But leaving disrespect behind is not abandonment, it's alignment. Alignment with who you are becoming. Alignment with the version of you that refuses to mistake pain for love. Alignment with the truth that peace is non-negotiable. When someone hurts you intentionally, they reveal who they are, how they handle power, how they handle vulnerability, how they handle trust. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Trying to give them another chance after that is like trying to unlearn a lesson your soul has already mastered. There's a reason you don't feel the same anymore. A reason your heart resists going back even when your mind romanticizes the past. Growth shifts your tolerance. Healing sharpens awareness. Awareness makes it impossible to settle for what once felt familiar. You're not cold, you're cautious, not distant, you're discerning, not unforgiving, you're finished. Finishing what hurts you is not failure, it's evolution. People will try to guilt you into staying the same version of yourself they could manipulate. They'll remind you of your kindness, patience, loyalty, as if these qualities obligate you to endure harm. Your kindness is not a contract for mistreatment. Your loyalty is not a license for betrayal. These traits were never meant to be used against you. The right people don't require you to abandon yourself to keep them. They don't push you to the edge to see how far you'll bend. They don't gamble with your emotions and then call it a mistake when it goes too far. The right people protect what they value. Anyone who truly values you would never put themselves in a position to lose you by choice. That's why another chance isn't mercy. It's permission for repetition. The hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is accepting what you hoped for isn't coming. That the apology will never repair what behavior keeps breaking. Love cannot survive where respect is absent. Once you accept that, something shifts. You stop chasing clarity from the person who created confusion. You stop seeking validation from the one who invalidated you. You stop searching for peace in the place your spirit was constantly under attack. Slowly, very slowly, you start to breathe again. Your strength returns, not loud, aggressive strength, but quiet confidence that comes from honoring yourself, from keeping promises to yourself rather than breaking them for others. This strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue or explain. It simply chooses differently. Choosing differently doesn't mean you didn't love deeply. It means you learned deeply, and that lesson will shape how you move forever. You won't rush intimacy. You won't ignore red flags. You won't confuse charm with character. You won't explain your boundaries to people determined to cross them. You walk away sooner. Trust your instincts faster. Recognize that consistency speaks louder than words. And most importantly, you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt when they've already shown their true selves. Someone who hurt you intentionally didn't lose you when you left. They lost you the moment they decided your pain was acceptable collateral for their comfort. You didn't lose anything by leaving. You regained yourself. There will be days when your mind tries to rewrite the story, to downplay the disrespect, highlight the rare moments of kindness. Attachment survives by bargaining with memory, by making you forget how many nights you went to bed hurting while they slept undisturbed, by convincing you that if you just explained it one more time, they'd finally understand. But someone who wanted to understand would have done so the first time you were hurt. You don't need better words, better timing, to soften your pain so it's easier to swallow. You already communicated, your tears spoke, your silence spoke, your distance spoke, and they still chose themselves. Another chance will not heal. It will only disguise familiarity as hope. People who hurt you intentionally sense when you're about to detach. They feel it in your shorter responses, in your energy shift, in your withdrawal. That's when they suddenly appear attentive, reflective, loving, apologetic. Ask yourself, why did it take the threat of losing you for them to show up? Real love doesn't need fear to be activated. You were never asking for too much. You just asked the wrong person to be what they weren't capable of being. No patience can turn someone into what they refuse to become. You can't love someone into respecting you. You can't forgive someone into accountability. Loyalty cannot make someone value you. Value shows up when it's inconvenient. Respect appears when no one is watching. Integrity reveals itself when it costs something. They revealed who they are when it mattered most. Another chance would only delay the realization your soul already knows. You outgrew the version of life where pain was normalized. That's when guilt tries to sneak in, the voice saying, but they've been through a lot. Nobody's perfect. What if this time is different? Yes, no one's perfect, but there's a difference between imperfection and repeated harm, between human mistakes and calculated disregard, between learning and exploiting. Forgiveness is not ignorance. Deep down, you know which this was. You felt the shift when you stopped feeling safe speaking your truth, when you chose silence to avoid conflict, when you rehearsed conversations in your head to maintain peace. That wasn't love, it was survival. Love doesn't require abandoning your voice. Love doesn't punish honesty. Love doesn't make you question your worth. If staying cost you your self-respect, the price is too high. Walking away isn't about proving something to them. It's proving to yourself you refuse to participate in relationships that demand silent suffering. They may move on quickly, act unaffected, replace you. Let them. That doesn't diminish your worth. It confirms what they lost. People who exploit don't mourn, they replace. You heal, you reflect, you rise. Healing isn't linear. Some days you feel strong, some days empty. Some days you'll miss them, even after everything. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. But notice this. Each day you don't go back, your clarity grows, your standards rise, your tolerance for nonsense fades, and gradually, the version of you that once begged for basic respect becomes someone who no longer negotiates it. That's growth. That's power, and it's the kind of power that doesn't need validation. The world rarely talks about the grief of letting go of someone who's still alive, the grief of choosing yourself when your heart wanted to choose them, the grief of accepting that love alone isn't enough. That grief is sacred. It marks the moment you stopped sacrificing yourself for the comfort of familiarity. Some people only know how to love when it's easy, when it's convenient, when self-reflection isn't required. When things get real and accountability shows up, they disappear or become cruel. You don't need to wait around for them to grow. Growth is a personal choice, not a favor you owe someone to figure themselves out. Your responsibility isn't to fix them, it's to protect yourself. And protecting yourself sometimes looks like saying no more chances, even when your heart still cares. Caring doesn't mean tolerating harm. Love without boundaries is not love, it's self-neglect. This is the season where you stop explaining and start choosing, where you stop hoping and start honoring what you already know, where you stop opening doors that only lead to pain, and the moment you fully commit to that, something shifts. You stop chasing people, proving yourself, accepting crumbs, and start attracting peace. Peace doesn't arrive loudly, it doesn't rush in with fireworks or promises. It arrives quietly, almost subtly, after chaos is removed. At first, it may feel empty because you're so accustomed to emotional noise. You mistake calm for loss because pain became familiar. But give it time. What feels like emptiness is actually space, space for yourself to return. You don't realize how heavy something was until you finally set it down. For so long, you carried the weight of their moods, their unpredictability, their behavior. You held the responsibility of making things work, of keeping balance, of understanding them even when they refused to understand you, and you called that love. But love is not exhaustion. Love is not anxiety. Love does not leave you questioning your standing constantly. You were doing emotional labor for two people while they enjoyed your effort without matching it. That imbalance doesn't fix itself with another chance. It deepens. And here's a hard truth. They didn't misunderstand your pain. They measured it. They observed how much you could endure before pushing back, how long you would stay silent before reaching out. They saw that you valued the connection more than your own comfort, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly. That is not love. That is leverage. People who hurt you on purpose don't fear causing pain. They fear losing access to you. That's why the moment you become firm, the moment your energy shifts, the moment you stop pleading for basic decency, they panic. Because what they lose isn't you, it's control. And control is addictive to people who lack empathy. You weren't difficult to love. You were too available for someone who didn't respect what you offered. Your openness, your forgiveness, your emotional depth, these are gifts. But in the wrong hands, even gifts can be misused. So no, don't give them another chance, not because of anger, but because you've learned. Learn that love should not feel like walking on glass. Learn that respect should not need repeated requests. Learn that someone who truly values you would never make you beg for basic decency. There is strength in accepting disappointment without turning it into bitterness, in recognizing someone didn't meet you where you stood and choosing not to descend to their level. That strength is quiet, grounded, unshakable. It's the strength of someone who knows their worth without needing validation. You might feel tempted to reach out when loneliness hits, to check in, to reopen communication under the guise of closure, but closure doesn't come from them. It comes from your choice to stop participating in what broke you. Every unanswered message is a boundary. Every day you don't return is a vote for your future. Every time you choose not to engage, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was drained trying to be enough for someone who never intended to show up fully. This isn't about proving anything, it's about preserving everything. Once you've been hurt intentionally, staying teaches your nervous system that danger is normal. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. Healing requires distance, not as punishment, but as reprogramming. Distance is where clarity lives. In it, you see patterns clearly, how often your needs were dismissed, how often boundaries were challenged, how often patience was demanded while accountability was absent. You realize you weren't asking too much, you were asking for reciprocity. Another chance only reinforces the illusion that effort alone can create safety. Safety doesn't come from trying harder, it comes from alignment. People aligned with you don't need convincing to treat you well. They don't confuse you, they don't hurt you, and ask for repeated chances. This is the chapter where you stop explaining your value to those committed to misunderstanding it, where you stop waiting for apologies that don't change behavior, where you stop hoping someone becomes what they've already shown they are not. Letting go doesn't erase what was shared. It honors what you learned, and what you learned is priceless. You learned your intuition is real, your boundaries matter. Love without respect dismantles you slowly. Walking away is sometimes the only way to survive with your soul intact. Once you learn that, there's no going back, not because you closed off, but because you're awake. This awakening changes how you love. It makes you more selective, not colder, more intentional, not distant, more grounded, not guarded. You stop chasing intensity and start choosing stability. Stop romanticizing chaos and start respecting peace. Stop confusing attachment with connection. One day, without realizing it, you'll look back and feel gratitude, not for what they did, but for what you became by choosing yourself. Quiet confidence forms once you stop seeking validation from people who hurt you. At first, it's subtle. You don't announce it, you barely trust it, but it shows in your pause before reacting, in no longer defending your feelings, in no longer explaining why something hurt. That confidence comes from finally believing yourself. For too long, you doubted your perception because someone convinced you your pain was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. Now you see clearly, pain doesn't need permission, hurt doesn't need consensus. If something wounded you deeply, that truth stands on its own. The person who caused it knew exactly what they were doing. People who hurt you on purpose hide behind charm, intelligence, or emotional language. They speak of growth and healing. But when it's time to act, when restraint, respect, and accountability matter, their actions vanish. Words are cheap when behavior remains unchanged. You didn't leave because you gave up. You left because you refused to keep paying the emotional price for promises never fulfilled. You refused to explain your humanity to someone who benefited from ignoring it. That quiet decision is revolutionary. Once you stop giving chances to people who hurt you intentionally, you stop betraying yourself, stop reenacting lessons, stop reopening wounds under the illusion of hope. Misplaced hope is self-harm. Missing someone doesn't mean they deserve access again. Missing is memory, not character evaluation. You can miss who they were at their best and still accept who they were at their worst. Both truths can coexist. You can remember the good without forgetting the damage. You can feel compassion without offering proximity. You can care from a distance. Distance doesn't mean hatred, it means wisdom. Wisdom knows some people only meet you where it's convenient. They pull you down to tolerance, never rise to love. That's why another chance now feels heavy. It doesn't excite, it fills you with dread. Your nervous system remembers the cost. Your body remembers what your heart tried to excuse. This is why you no longer argue boundaries, justify absence, or explain why you're done. People who truly respected you never needed explanations. Those demanding them usually cross the line. Let them be confused. Let them tell their story. Let them call you cold, distant, or changed. You don't need to correct the narrative when your life finally feels peaceful. You don't need to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. Silence becomes powerful when it protects your energy, your peace, the version of you that no longer survives chaos just to feel chosen. You're not the same person anymore, and that's not something to apologize for. Growth will threaten those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. The moment you stopped giving another chance was the moment you stopped negotiating your worth. The moment you stopped hoping they'd change was the moment you began changing. Change doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval. It shows in your movement, choices, and refusal to settle. You begin choosing people who show up consistently, don't confuse you, don't keep you guessing, don't test your limits just to see how much you'll endure. You begin to recognize that real love feels steady, predictable, safe, not boring, but secure. And safe feels unfamiliar when chaos was your normal. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong, it means new, it means healed, it means aligned. This is where discernment replaces desperation, where intuition replaces hope, where self-trust replaces self-doubt. You stop asking, what if they change? And start asking, why would I return to what already showed me who it is? That question changes everything, because once you truly understand that they hurt you on purpose, not by accident, not unknowingly, not because they didn't care enough to notice, you stop fantasizing about reconciliation. You stop reopening doors that lead to the same pain. You stop confusing forgiveness with access. And you finally decisively choose yourself. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of respect. And respect is the foundation of everything that lasts. There's a shift that happens when you stop hoping people will become who you needed them to be and start accepting who they already showed themselves to be. That shift is quiet but irreversible. It's the moment you stop negotiating with reality, the moment you stop asking why and start saying enough. You begin to see how much energy you wasted trying to be understood by someone who never intended to understand you. How many nights you replayed conversations, wondering if you said the wrong thing, if you were too much, if you asked for too much. But the truth is heavier than all those questions combined. You were dealing with someone who knew the impact of their actions and chose themselves anyway. That realization hurts hurts, but it also frees you. Because once you accept that the hurt was intentional, you stop internalizing it. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? You stop shrinking your needs. You stop apologizing for your emotions. You realize the pain wasn't proof of your inadequacy. It was proof of their character. And character doesn't change because you love harder. This is where many people get stuck. They confuse empathy with endurance. They believe that being a good person means staying, forgiving endlessly, understanding endlessly, sacrificing endlessly. But empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Love that requires you to suffer quietly is not love, it's conditioning. You weren't meant to be trained to tolerate pain. You were meant to be respected. There's a reason your spirit resisted going back. There's a reason the thought of giving them another chance feels heavy instead of hopeful. Your intuition already closed the door. You're just catching up mentally. Intuition doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up as unease, hesitation, as that inner voice saying, I can't do this again. Listen to it, because every time you ignored it before, you paid for it with your peace. The people who hurt you on purpose rely on one thing, your willingness to doubt yourself. They rely on your kindness to override clarity. They rely on your hope to override memory. They rely on your fear of being alone to override self-respect. And the moment you remove those, they lose power. That's why they try to rewrite the past, why they minimize what happened, why they say things like, you're holding on to the past, or you're too sensitive, or why can't you just move on? Because if they can make you forget, they can repeat, but you don't forget anymore. You remember how it felt to be dismissed, disrespected, hurt, and then blamed for reacting. You remember the confusion, the emotional whiplash, the way you felt small in moments you should have felt safe. And remembering is not weakness, it's protection. You don't need to announce your boundaries. You don't need to defend your decision. You don't need their agreement to move forward. Closure is not a conversation, it's a decision to stop reopening wounds, a decision to stop giving people access when they've proven they don't know how to handle it, a decision to value your peace more than their potential. Potential is one of the most dangerous traps. You fall in love with who someone could be while ignoring who they consistently are. Potential doesn't build safety, consistency does. And they were consistent in hurting you. Once you accept that, you stop romanticizing their words. You start measuring actions. You start noticing patterns. And patterns don't lie. This clarity changes how you move in the world. You become slower to attach, quicker to detach. When respect disappears, you no longer chase intention. You no longer confuse emotional highs and lows with passion. You choose calm. You choose steadiness. You choose people who don't make you question where you stand. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who benefit from your self-doubt. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who cross them intentionally. You stop giving chances to people who saw your pain and kept going. And in that space, something powerful grows. Self-trust. The kind of self-trust that doesn't seek permission, doesn't ask for validation, doesn't collapse when someone leaves. Self-trust is knowing that even if it hurts, you'll be okay. Even if you walk alone for a while, you'll be at peace. Even if they never understand, you don't need them to, because understanding was never the issue. Respect was. And now that you've chosen yourself, you'll never unsee the difference between someone who values you and someone who uses you, between someone who protects your heart and someone who tests how much damage it can take. You've crossed a line you won't step back over, not because you're bitter, but because you're aware. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. Freedom doesn't feel triumphant at first. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like standing in a quiet room after years of noise and wondering what to do with the silence. You reach for your phone out of habit. You expect a message, chaos. And when it doesn't come, your mind tries to fill the gap with doubt. That's not weakness. That's withdrawal from emotional addiction. Not love, not connection. Addiction to unpredictability. Addiction to hoping this time would be different. Addiction to believing that if you just held on a little longer, they'd become who they pretended to be at the start. Beginnings lie when fueled by intention instead of integrity. People who hurt you on purpose don't reveal themselves immediately. They reveal themselves gradually, in moments where you excuse what shouldn't be excused, in moments where you say they didn't mean it, even though something inside you knows they did, in moments where you choose comfort over truth. Truth eventually arrives through exhaustion, through numbness, through realizing you're no longer yourself around them. You are careful with your words. You anticipate their reactions more than express your feelings. You manage their emotions while neglecting your own. That's not partnership, that's captivity. And captivity doesn't end politely. It ends with boundaries that feel harsh to those who benefited from your softness. When you stop giving them another chance, they may accuse you of being unforgiving, giving up too soon, not seeing how hard they're trying now. But ask yourself, why is effort only visible after consequences appear? Effort that shows only after damage is not commitment, it's damage control. And damage control is temporary. You've already lived the cycle: apology, honeymoon phase, return to old behavior, realization nothing changed, disappointment, self-blame, repeat. Breaking that cycle requires something radical, not more love, patience, or understanding. It requires finality. Finality doesn't mean rage, it means resolve. It means deciding your life will no longer revolve around someone else's inability to treat you with basic respect. Once you make that decision, your standards recalibrate. You notice what you ignored before: how people speak when frustrated, how they respond to boundaries, how they handle disagreement, how they react when things don't go their way. You stop excusing red flags because you no longer need anyone badly enough to ignore them. Needing less is power. Power is not domination. Power is independence. Power is knowing you can walk away and still be okay. Power is not clinging to what hurts just because it's familiar. People who hurt you on purpose fear that power. It exposes them. It exposes that they were never in control. You were simply choosing to stay. When you stop choosing them, they feel loss, but you feel relief, even if mixed with sadness. Relief that you no longer have to brace yourself. Relief that you no longer have to convince anyone of your worth. Relief that you can finally breathe without waiting for the next emotional blow. You don't miss them. You missed a version of yourself that believed things would change, and that version did the best it could with what it knew at the time. Honor that version. Don't punish yourself by going back. Growth means you don't need the same lessons repeated at a higher cost. Each return teaches them they can go further, hurt deeper, apologize later, and still keep you. That's why this boundary matters. It's not just about them, it's about who you become if you stay. You become smaller, quieter, hesitant, less trusting. But when you leave, even through pain, you expand, you reclaim, you rebuild. Rebuilding is slow, quiet, internal. No one applauds it. No one sees the nights you choose not to reach out, the mornings you choose not to scroll their social media, the moments you choose dignity over impulse. But those moments accumulate. They accumulate into self-respect. They accumulate into clarity. They accumulate into a future where you no longer attract people who feel powerful by hurting others. Because once you stop tolerating intentional pain, your entire life shifts. The conversations you accept, the energy you allow, the love you recognize. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. You stop confusing attachment with commitment. You stop confusing history with obligation, and you start moving with intention instead of reaction. This isn't bitterness. This is discernment. This isn't anger. This is self-honor. This isn't closing your heart. This is protecting it so it can open to the right things at the right time with the right people. And that protection begins with the one decision you already made: not to give them another chance because they hurt you on purpose. And you finally chose not to let that be your story anymore. There's a moment when you realize the ache isn't pulling you back toward them anymore. It's pushing you forward into yourself. The ache changes shape. It's no longer longing. It's clarity settling in. It's the understanding that what you lost wasn't love, but an illusion you tried tirelessly to maintain. You start noticing how light your chest feels when you don't have to anticipate their mood, how your mind rests when you don't have to decode mixed signals, how your days stretch open when you're not waiting for a message that dictates your emotional state. That's not emptiness, it's freedom. Freedom means reclaiming space it was denied, and it's uncomfortable because you weren't trained for peace. You were trained to endure. Endurance becomes identity when pain is constant. You wear it like armor. You tell yourself you're strong because you stay, loyal because you forgave, mature because you understood. But real strength is not measured by how much you survive. It's measured by how quickly you leave what destroys you. They didn't need to raise their voice to hurt you. They didn't need to betray you loudly. Sometimes the deepest damage comes from subtle dismissals, from withheld affection, from selective kindness, from knowing exactly what hurts you and choosing to do it anyway, quietly enough to deny it later. That's how intentional harm hides. Implausible deniability in "I didn't mean it like that," in your overthinking, in "you're too sensitive." But your body never lies. Your body knew before your mind was ready to admit it. That tension, that fatigue, that sense of shrinking, that loss of joy, those were not coincidences. Those were warning signs, and you listened. Listening to yourself is the beginning of sovereignty. It's when you stop outsourcing your worth, when you stop asking permission to feel what you feel, when you stop seeking explanations from the very people who caused the confusion. You realize you don't need them to admit what they did for it to be real. You don't need their apology to validate your pain. You don't need their growth to justify your leaving. You left because staying required you to betray yourself. That's enough. That's more than enough. People who hurt you on purpose often accuse you of being dramatic when you finally draw a line. Lines remove access. Lines expose behavior. Lines end the game. And the game was never love, it was leverage. They leveraged your empathy, your patience, your hope. They counted on your fear of starting over. They relied on your reluctance to disappoint. And when you finally stop playing along, the dynamic collapses. That collapse isn't chaos, it's correction. Correction feels brutal when you've been bending for too long. Standing upright feels unfamiliar. Saying no feels heavy. Silence feels loud. But each of those is a muscle you're rebuilding. You don't go back to what broke you just because it's familiar. You don't reopen doors that taught you how easily your heart could be wounded. You don't give someone another chance when they already demonstrated what they do with chances. You choose differently because you are different now. Different because you learned to recognize emotional manipulation without needing it to be extreme. Different because you learned that inconsistency is a choice, not a flaw. Different because you learned that love does not require suffering as proof of depth. Suffering without safety is drowning, and you're done drowning. You don't owe anyone your healing journey. You don't owe anyone your time to see if they change. You don't owe anyone another opportunity to teach you the same lesson in a harsher way. Your life is not a classroom for people who refuse to learn. It's a sanctuary for what honors you. As you move forward, you'll notice something subtle but powerful. You stop chasing connection, and connection starts finding you. Not the chaotic kind, not the kind that keeps you guessing, but the steady, respectful kind that doesn't require you to dim your intuition to keep the peace. You become calm in ways that once felt impossible, calm in disagreement, calm in solitude, calm in uncertainty, because your peace no longer depends on someone else's behavior. That's the real win. And when they cross your mind, as they will, you won't feel the urge to return. You'll feel gratitude for the lesson and relief that you didn't ignore it, because you know now the pain wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't unavoidable. It was intentional. And choosing not to give them another chance wasn't cruelty. It was courage. Courage doesn't always feel bold. Sometimes it feels like sitting alone with your thoughts and not reaching for what once comforted you, even when that comfort came with a cost. Sometimes courage feels like restraint, like choosing not to respond, like letting silence stand where explanations used to live, like trusting yourself enough to stop reopening doors just because someone knocked. You don't miss them the way you think you do. You miss the familiarity. You miss the version of yourself that believed things would turn out differently. You miss the hope. But hope tied to someone who hurt you on purpose is not hope. It's denial wearing a softer face. And denial is exhausting. That exhaustion was your wake-up call. There was a time when you would have chased clarity, demanded answers, asked for reassurance, tried to fix what wasn't yours to fix. But now you see clarity doesn't come from conversations with people who distort the truth. It comes from observing behavior and believing what it shows you. They showed you how they act when they feel secure in your loyalty. They showed you how little they prioritize your emotional safety. They showed you how quickly they can rationalize your pain. And they showed you that when it came down to choosing between your well-being and their comfort, they chose themselves. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was a decision. You're not bitter for recognizing it, you're grounded. Grounded people don't argue about reality, they accept it and adjust accordingly. Adjusting doesn't mean closing your heart, it means redirecting it. It means no longer pouring energy into places that leak. It means understanding that love is not proven through endurance. Love is proven through care, consistency, and respect. And respect doesn't need reminders. There's a reason you no longer feel the urge to explain yourself. There's a reason your boundaries feel firmer now. There's a reason the thought of going back feels heavy instead of comforting. You're no longer negotiating your self-worth. Negotiation is what kept you stuck. You negotiated your needs. You negotiated your limits. You negotiated your intuition. And each time you did, you move further away from yourself. Now you're moving back into alignment with what you deserve, with what you will and will not tolerate, with the truth that love should never require you to abandon your dignity. People who hurt you on purpose rely on confusion. They thrive in gray areas. They benefit when you doubt your memory, your perception, your feelings. That's why clarity threatens them. Your clarity, your refusal to participate in emotional chaos, your decision to walk away without asking for permission, that clarity is what finally breaks the cycle. You don't need to prove anything by staying gone. You just need to keep choosing yourself quietly, consistently, without drama. Let your life speak for you. Let your peace answer the questions they never wanted to face. And as time passes, you'll notice something else. You'll stop replaying the past. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controls you. The lessons remain, but the charge fades. The memories lose their grip. The urge to revisit disappears. That's healing. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without the need to return. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you started caring about yourself more. And that shift changes everything. How you love, how you trust, how you choose. From here on, you won't be impressed by words alone. You won't be swayed by temporary effort. You won't confuse intensity with intimacy. You'll look for consistency. You'll look for accountability. You'll look for peace. And peace will recognize you when you arrive, not because you chased it, but because you protected it. Protecting it meant one simple, difficult, life-changing decision. You finally honored yourself by not giving them another chance. What changes next is subtle but permanent. You begin to move through the world differently, not guarded, not closed, but grounded. You stop leaning forward emotionally. You stop overextending. You stop trying to secure connection by shrinking yourself. And without forcing anything, people either rise to meet you or fall away. Both outcomes bring relief. You no longer chase explanations because you've already seen the truth in action. You no longer argue your pain because you've accepted that someone who hurt you on purpose never needed clarification. They needed boundaries. And boundaries don't negotiate, they don't convince, they simply exist. There was a time when their silence felt unbearable, when not knowing how they felt dictated your mood, when distance felt like punishment. But now silence feels neutral, distance feels safe, and safety feels like home. That's how you know you've changed. You start noticing how much energy you once spent monitoring someone else's behavior instead of nurturing your own life. How often you delayed your peace, waiting for their consistency. How many compromises you made just to keep the connection intact. And you realize you weren't asking for too much. You were giving too much to the wrong place. Giving stops being painful when it's received with respect. People who hurt you on purpose often accuse you of being different once you stop tolerating it. They say you've become distant, cold, unreachable. What they really mean is you're no longer available for manipulation. You're no longer responsive to guilt. You're no longer bending to maintain access. Distance isn't cruelty. Distance is clarity, and clarity doesn't argue. There's no need to explain why something hurt. No need to justify your withdrawal. No need to prove your boundaries are valid. You know what you felt, you know what happened, and you know what it cost you. That knowledge settles into your bones. It makes you slower to trust words and quicker to trust patterns. It makes you value emotional safety over emotional intensity. It makes you recognize that love isn't something you have to survive. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing pain is a prerequisite for depth. You stop confusing attachment with meaning, and in doing so, you create space for something healthier to exist. The right connections don't feel like work. They don't keep you guessing. They don't require constant reassurance. They don't punish honesty or weaponize vulnerability. They don't leave you feeling small, and because you've known the opposite, you'll never mistake it again. This is what it means to outgrow a cycle, not with anger, not with revenge, but with awareness so complete that going back feels impossible. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't offer respect. You don't need apologies that arrive only when consequences do. You don't need promises that weren't kept the first time. You need peace. And peace is built by honoring the moment you decided not to give them another chance. That decision continues to echo forward, shaping every choice you make. Who you let in, what you tolerate, how you respond, how you walk away sooner, how you trust yourself more deeply. It wasn't one act of strength, it was the beginning of a new standard. And standards don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves over time through consistency, through silence, through absence, through a life that no longer revolves around pain, and that life is already unfolding step by step because you finally chose not to return to what hurt you on purpose. At some point, you stop needing reassurance that you did the right thing. The constant inner debate quiets down. The questions lose their urgency. You don't wake up wondering what they're doing or whether they regret it, not because you don't care, but because your sense of self is no longer tied to their awareness. That's when you realize how much power you gave away before. You gave power to their reactions, to their approval, to their version of events. You waited for them to acknowledge the pain, to validate it, to take responsibility. But healing didn't come when they stayed silent or defensive. Healing came when you stopped waiting. Waiting keeps you stuck in their timeline. Choosing yourself puts you back in yours. There's something grounding about no longer needing to be understood by someone who hurt you on purpose. It's not indifference, it's maturity. It's knowing that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Some people only get the version of you that's distant and unavailable because closeness requires trust. And trust was broken knowingly. You're not obligated to reopen yourself to someone who closed their empathy when it mattered most. This doesn't make you hard, it makes you wise. Wisdom is learning when effort is no longer noble, when forgiveness no longer means proximity, when staying kind to yourself requires being firm with others. People who hurt you on purpose often mistake your silence for weakness. They think if you're not reacting, you're unaffected. But silence isn't surrender, it's resolve. It's you choosing not to give your energy to something that already took too much. You don't need to explain why you changed. Growth doesn't require permission, and growth changes your pace. You move slower into connections. You listen more, you observe more, you trust actions over apologies. You notice how someone treats you when there's nothing to gain. You notice whether respect stays consistent or disappears under pressure. You don't rush intimacy anymore because you know how quickly it can be weaponized by the wrong person. You protect your vulnerability, not because it's fragile, but because its value doesn't beg to be recognized. There's a deep peace in no longer arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you, in no longer defending your boundaries, in no longer explaining why something hurt when it was obvious. That peace grows the more you choose it. You start to feel anchored, grounded, less reactive, less emotionally available to chaos. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to be right. You don't need closure from someone who refused to be accountable. You already closed a chapter when you stopped giving them another chance. That chapter taught you discernment. It taught you restraint. It taught you that love should never cost you your self-respect. That loyalty without reciprocity is self-abandonment. That forgiveness without boundaries invites repetition. And you didn't come this far to relearn the same lesson, so you move forward, not dramatically, not loudly, but deliberately. You choose environments that feel calm, people who feel steady, conversations that feel honest. You notice how different it feels to be around someone who doesn't trigger your survival instincts. That difference is everything, because now you know peace isn't boring, it's nourishing, it's expansive, it's what allows you to become more of who you are instead of less. And you protect that peace without guilt, not because you closed off, but because you finally understand what it cost you to keep giving chances to someone who hurt you on purpose, and you're done paying that price. There's a quiet pride that begins to replace the pain. Not pride in leaving, but pride in not abandoning yourself anymore. You start to recognize how many times you chose discomfort just to keep the connection alive. And instead of judging yourself for it, you honor the growth it took to finally stop. You didn't leave because it was easy. You left because staying required you to numb parts of yourself that were never meant to be silenced. And once you stop numbing, you feel everything more clearly. Your intuition sharpens, your tolerance narrows, your standards rise. You no longer confuse being needed with being valued. You no longer accept crumbs just because they come from someone familiar. Familiarity loses its grip when it's no longer safe. You see now that the hardest relationships to walk away from are the ones where the hurt wasn't constant but unpredictable. Just enough affection to keep you hoping, just enough pain to keep you doubting yourself. That push and pull kept you attached longer than love ever could. But attachment breaks when awareness takes over. Awareness reminds you of how often you gave grace where accountability was needed, how often you stayed quiet to avoid conflict, how often you convinced yourself that Being patient was the same as being respected. It wasn't. Respect is shown without reminders. Care is given without conditions. Love doesn't leave you questioning whether you're asking for too much when you're only asking for the bare minimum. And now when you think about giving them another chance, your body resists, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Your system remembers what your heart tried to forget. It remembers the cost and refuses to pay it again. That refusal is self-trust. Self-trust changes how you respond to temptation. You don't romanticize the past anymore. You see it clearly without filters, without excuses. You acknowledge the good, but you don't let it erase the harm. Because harm that was intentional doesn't disappear just because time passed. Time doesn't heal what accountability never addressed. You also stop internalizing their behavior. You stop wondering if you could have loved better, communicated better, stayed calm, or been more understanding. You understand now someone who hurt you on purpose will always find a reason to justify, and you were never the reason. That realization lifts a weight you didn't know you were carrying. It frees you from trying to be perfect for people who never intended to treat you right. It frees you from performing emotional labor for someone who only showed up when it suited them. You become less available to anyone who brings confusion into your life, not because you're afraid, but because you value clarity. You value emotional safety. You value peace that doesn't have to be defended, and peace becomes your baseline. You stop chasing connection out of loneliness. You stop feeling silence with people who drain you. You learn how to sit with yourself without needing distraction. And in that stillness, you reconnect with parts of you that were neglected. Your creativity returns. Your focus sharpens. Your laughter feels real again. You sleep better. You breathe deeper. You feel whole without needing someone else to complete you. That wholeness is not arrogance. It's alignment. Alignment with who you are when you're not trying to earn love. Alignment with what feels right instead of what feels familiar. Alignment with a life that doesn't revolve around managing someone else's emotions. You're not closed to love. You're close to disrespect. And there's a difference. The difference is everything. Because when you no longer give chances to people who hurt you on purpose, you don't just protect your heart, you protect your future. You protect the version of you that is still becoming the version that deserves consistency, honesty, and care without conditions. And that version of you is finally in control. Control doesn't mean rigidity. It doesn't mean shutting people out or hardening your heart. It means awareness. It means choice. It means you are no longer on autopilot, repeating old patterns just because they feel familiar. You are present now, and presence changes everything. You begin to notice the difference between someone who brings calm into your life and someone who brings chaos disguised as passion. You notice how your body reacts before your mind catches up. You notice how peace feels expansive while drama feels tight and draining. And once you feel that difference, you can't unknow it. That's why going back is no longer tempting. It's not because the feelings disappeared. It's because your self-respect grew louder than your attachment. Attachment whispers, maybe this time. Self-respect says, I already know how this ends. And self-respect finally wins. You understand now that people who hurt you on purpose often disguise control as concern. They question your choices, they doubt your instincts. They frame their behavior as love while slowly eroding your confidence. And you mistook that erosion for intimacy because it required your constant attention. But real intimacy doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't keep you hyper-aware. It doesn't demand that you monitor yourself to stay safe. You were surviving, not loving, and survival mode is addictive when it's all you know. The nervous system confuses intensity with connection. The mind confuses struggle with depth, but the soul knows the difference. The soul always knows. That's why it resisted. That's why it felt heavy when you considered going back. That's why peace felt strange but right. Now, instead of trying to be understood, you focus on understanding yourself. Instead of explaining your boundaries, you honor them. Instead of reacting to disrespect, you remove yourself from it. You don't correct people anymore. You let them reveal themselves, and revelation is a gift. It saves you time. It saves you energy. It saves you from investing your heart where it will be mishandled. You no longer chase consistency. You expect it. You no longer ask for effort. You observe it. You no longer hope for accountability. You require it. And the people who can't meet those standards naturally drift away, not because you push them, but because access to you now requires respect. This isn't loneliness. This is refinement. Refinement of your circle. Refinement of your standards. Refinement of your sense of self. You stop being impressed by words and start being moved by behavior. You stop romanticizing apologies and start valuing changed actions. You stop believing potential and start believing patterns. Patterns never lie, and the pattern was clear. They hurt you, saw the impact, and did it anyway. Once you accept that, there's no argument left to have, no explanation left to seek, no chance left to give, because another chance wouldn't be compassion, it would be self-betrayal, and you've done that enough. So you keep moving forward, some days strong, some days tired, some days unsure, but always aligned with the truth you can no longer ignore. You don't rush healing, you don't force forgiveness. You let time do what it does best, create distance between who you were and who you're becoming. And who you're becoming is someone who doesn't confuse pain with purpose, someone who doesn't stay where they are, repeatedly wounded, someone who understands that love should feel safe, not survived. This understanding doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you anchored, anchored in your values, anchored in your boundaries, anchored in the knowledge that you can care deeply without sacrificing yourself. And from that place, you don't need to announce your strength. You live it step by step, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. Not giving them another chance wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a life where you finally stopped negotiating your worth and started honoring it. And honoring your worth changes the way time feels. Days no longer revolve around anticipation or recovery. You're not bracing yourself for the next emotional swing. You're not rehearsing conversations in your head. You're not calculating how much of yourself you can give today without losing balance. Life starts to feel steady, predictable in the best way. That steadiness isn't dull, it's grounding. You begin to realize how much of your energy was being siphoned off by emotional turbulence, how much creativity, focus, and peace you sacrificed just to keep a connection alive that was quietly draining you. Now that that energy returns to you, you don't waste it proving anything to anyone. You invest it in your growth, in your healing, in building a life that doesn't require constant emotional labor. You stop living in reaction mode. Reaction mode kept you stuck. Every apology reset your hope. Every moment of kindness made you doubt your memory. Every promise made you question your decision. That cycle was never meant to resolve. It was meant to keep you available. Availability without respect is exploitation, and you finally stepped out of that trap. There's a reason the thought of giving them another chance now feels wrong in your bones. Not wrong emotionally, but morally, spiritually. You understand now that some lines once crossed knowingly don't get redrawn, not because you lack forgiveness, but because you value integrity. Integrity means your words and actions align. It means when you say you deserve better, you act like it. It means you don't keep returning to situations that teach people your boundaries are optional. People who hurt you on purpose count on inconsistency. They rely on your compassion to erase consequences. They assume time will soften what accountability never fixed. But time doesn't heal what keeps repeating, and you refuse to let it repeat again. That refusal required strength most people never develop. It required you to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it, to face loneliness instead of chasing familiarity, to choose uncertainty over guaranteed pain. Guaranteed pain is seductive because it's predictable, but predictable pain still destroys you. You didn't leave because you were sure of what would come next. You left because you were finally sure of what would happen if you stayed, and that certainty outweighed every fear you had about the unknown. That's wisdom. Wisdom doesn't always look confident. Sometimes it looks like doubt paired with discipline. Like missing someone and still not reaching out. Like loving someone and still choosing distance. Like caring deeply while saying no. That kind of wisdom is earned, and you earned it the hard way. You earned it through nights of self-doubt, through emotional whiplash, through giving the benefit of the doubt too many times, through hoping longer than you should have, through staying loyal when loyalty was not reciprocated. You don't shame yourself for that anymore. You honor it as part of your evolution, but you don't repeat it because repetition would mean ignoring the lesson. And you didn't survive all that just to go back unchanged. Now, when you encounter people who mirror those old patterns, something inside you disengages instantly. There's no drama, no confrontation, no need to explain. You feel it early, you trust it, and you walk away quietly. That quiet departure is your growth in action. You don't argue with red flags. You don't negotiate with disrespect. You don't stay where you're harmed intentionally. You understand now that intentional harm reveals intention, and intention reveals character. And character is not your job to fix. Your job is to protect your peace. And peace is not passive. It's actively maintained through choices that honor your limits, through boundaries that don't bend under pressure, through silence that refuses to feed chaos. The more you choose peace, the less you crave intensity. The less you crave intensity, the less you tolerate manipulation. And the less you tolerate manipulation, the more your life aligns with who you truly are. That alignment is not accidental. It's the result of the decision you made when you stopped giving chances to someone who hurt you on purpose. And that decision continues to shape everything that comes.